Capsule 21 podcast. This is Middle March. I'm with Piv, our special guest, Georgina Hooper, and we are going to do a cold open. Georgina Hooper, what is this? When you are confronted with this image, and imagine someone doesn't know you, doesn't know any of us, they see this image, they see you seeing this image. What are they looking at right now? What do you see?
They're seeing my homage to traditional Chinese painting, which has fed into my art practice for such a long time. It's my name as well. And in the tradition of Chinese painting, artists have many names. That's actually my married name. It's the name that I would have when I'm in China and Japan. It's provenance. It's history. It's like a living history, I suppose. It's one that I'm bringing into NFTs as well.
Now, what is this?
This is like another seal. Often in traditional Chinese paintings, there'll be like a seal that recognizes that work as a particular genre, like a landscape painting will have a particular seal for that. And for me, working with AI, I feel that it's important to acknowledge that as a medium and do it in a visual way. This is an adaptation of the Dali seal, which is usually horizontal, but I've rotated it to reflect the angle of the typical seals from the tradition.
On this week's episode of the Capsule 21 podcast, we talk to our guest, Georgina Hooper, who is an artist who blends the traditional 5 strokes of Chinese landscape painting with contemporary AI art. We discuss her journey, stamps, impressionism, sushi, and the rise of the feminine in Web3 through the vessel of the Octopus.
Hi, I'm Georgina. I'm primarily an artist working across the mediums of physical painting and AI, but I'm also a researcher and curator, and I'm 1 year off attaining my PhD in art and philosophy. For me, art is an exploration of self-cultivation through creative experience and an opportunity to understand self and the world around us. And I change the color as you do in traditional Chinese painting of the seal. So they come in many different stamps. So your ink is all different colors. So in each of my composition, if I've used AI, I always bring an acknowledgement of Dali into it. I see Dali as a collaborator in a sense, but also as a medium. So this seal represents both an element of authorship, but also an element of this being a medium as well.
I love it. And to me, this was the reason I wanted to start with this was I just thought this juxtaposition was so dope and something that I had not seen. And so just for, the people watching this, this isn't just some random thing. It's like part of a, why is it? I have to go to 33%. That's weird. It's part of an entire composition here. And this is part of a whole collection. This is one I selected because it would make a good zoom in. The color palette is some commonalities there, but this kind of lockup I just think is fascinating. And you could imagine really does, it's really this amazing reinterpretation of the Dali thing, watermark or whatever, to imagine it as kind of, and it looks good because it's like you could imagine the traditional one being looking like this and this being the contemporary AI one. Now, what I really want to emphasize to people who are watching this is just what this top stamp kind of means. So I was looking at this video. Okay, this is a video of you and your process, a great video. You can find this on Georgina's bio and website. But this is a part where you, I don't know, this is like a standard application, but this was obviously in a video, so maybe did it extra ceremonial, but it seems like this is how you do it. So this is the application of the stamp.
And they all come together. You don't see the mistake. You see the effort of that continual practice again and again, and how it all just comes together beautifully. And that actually, if a simple way of so much and a part of painting.
I lost my place here. There you go.
The effort of that continual practice again and again, and how it all just comes together beautifully.
So when I watched that, I was like, wow, this is like very pleasing to me. The stamp itself is very beautiful. It's a gem of some kind, I guess. So like, the finished product versus the process of applying it and the stamp itself, the physicality of it. This is obviously a different stamp, but what does the marking of the stamp represent in terms of the process?
In terms of the process, you mean actually like making this mark? What does it represent in terms of, when you say process, you're talking about the process of applying the stamp down there?
yeah, applying of also just having the physical stamp, that's this beautiful thing, even though no one sees that, and applying it. And
So you're right that this one's different. So stamps come in different shapes. I have round ones as well, so it's always the same name, the same signature, but it is done in a number of different formats and shapes. I have some larger ones as well. And just to kind of acknowledge, there is a real artistry in steel carving in itself. It's an incredible art, and in the same as paper making and every aspect of the culture and the tradition of brush making and whatnot. It's very ceremonial. There's a lot of mindfulness, there's a lot of awareness and slowness that's actually necessitated by the materials, because they are fragile and they require a lot of care and concentration. And I think a good parallel to that is the green tea ceremony in Japan, which it's the way that the cup is handled, the way that the tea is stirred, it's all done so carefully because it has to be. And this relationship between materials and process is really beautifully interwoven with this art form. And there is absolute intention around that, as well as it forces a kind of cognition upon the artist, and the ritual practice and that self-cultivating kind of result that comes from it is really, it's very real. And so for me, like I love physical painting. I started doing my degree in fine art when I was 17, and for me it's always been very hands-on. It's only been fairly recently in my art practice that I've been making these kind of intrepid explorations into the digital. And so for me, I feel like I love bringing that physicality and that tradition as much as I can into the digital practices that I have, and also examining and understanding them through that lens. Even when I look at AI work, I look at it in relation to, there are two very different schools of thought in the Chinese painting tradition. And the northern school is, very methodological, it's very slow, it's very ritualistic, and this idea that enlightenment will only come through very consistent, rigid repetition of practice. But then there's this other train of thought within the whole culture, which is sort of represented by the Southern School, which is much more sudden and explosive. Su Shi's, who is a very famous Song Dynasty painter, poet, official literati, thinker, art critic, art historian. He was kind of like a bit of a renegade, and was seen doing things very kind of differently to the way that the tradition might have commanded of him. And I think that reflects and represents that kind of explosive and creative and playful way of making and actually coming up with extraordinary insight that I think is very parallel with AI, because it is playful and it's rapid and it's fast and it's dopamine fueled, it's fun. And I think that it's been a really beautiful experience for me, because as you can see by this video, I've dove deep into that kind of northern school of the practice, the methodological, the repetitious, the time consuming, and it's been lovely to engage with that other side of myself with AI. But I also
you were just pausing there as you described this. So this video is another video from that same article, to give credit to that article. And you mentioned like the philosophy of the northern school, and now we're watching you do it. And just to really emphasize to someone watching this, like you see on the left side, she's already painted a bunch of brush strokes, and now she's continuing to do so in a very methodical way. And as someone who Call of Duty, right, and then you mentioned AIR, which is like kind of what it's like. This is not something, if you play Call of Duty, you're doing a lot of, and it's not just painting the strokes, it's imagining what's going on in your head as you do this. Like you have to have a certain mindset to do this, and that requires a certain orientation and preparation. And then you've also mentioned your approach to mistakes and how you orient yourself around the feeling of making a mistake, of doing something you didn't intend to do, and then that orientation produces, like, okay, at the end of the process, that pays off, because then you realize the mistakes have. So it's like the mindset, the tools, the brush, the stamp, everything is so oriented around, the process, and watching that, create a result in the end. And then you have the AI element, which to me, the way I see that at least, is it's kind of the anti-process art, where, instead of thinking about it, you just think about the end, you type in, here's what I want it to look like. And there's a process by which you repeat that and you refresh it and you tweak it or whatever, but still it's so focused on the end. And it is this dopamine thing. And I guarantee you a lot of AI artists also play Call of Duty. Here is an AI rendering of mindfulness and art. This is a little bit, I don't know if I would consider this that beautiful per se, but you have the extreme process element, and then you have the, as I see it at least, extreme endpoint focused element of the AI. Fascinating that you like both, because I can imagine someone like you saying, like, no, the process is important for all art, not just this element, but you've embraced both. Yeah, process versus outcome.
But there is a process in chasing an outcome too. And for me, the whole purpose of art is to understand and examine my humanity, what it is to be a human being. And so just like when I'm painting in these methodological ways, I'm very mindful and aware of my nervous system and of making sure that it's calm so that my hand can be still. And, I'm aware of my breath. I'm aware of the sensory experience of it. And so when I am working with AI, it's exactly the same mindset that I have, in the sense that there is a hyper awareness of my experience of using AI as an artist and how I feel, and observing what's happening within my mind and my creativity, and, witnessing myself kind of falling into this beautiful flow, and then kind of like the delight and being led and leading at the same time. And again, both practices, there is a release control. There is only the practice and the intention, and then the space in between is just what happens to yourself as a human being engaging in that. And my PhD is very much around focusing and understanding traditional Chinese painting practice through the lens of neuroscience. So for me, it's always about research and study of self and humanity. And so AI for me is just another level, and it's another lens that I can look back on perhaps an artist like Sushi, who, he would have like alcohol and get really drunk, and they would be socializing.
Sorry, just can you tell me how to spell, because I want to pull this up for our viewers. How do I, and this is revealing my tremendous ignorance about many things, how do I spell his name?
So there are many different spellings, but you will get, like, it's SU space and then SHI, or it could be SU and SHIH. And then he's also known as Sudong Po as well. He is actually one of the most famous Chinese paintings in history. He's like, the Da Vinci of Chinese art, in the sense that he's revered and very well known, which again, I think is really fascinating and interesting that we in the West really don't, like, you don't have to like not be across art history. You can know, most people know who Da Vinci is, but nobody knows who Sushi is. And he was like a polymath. That piece there, Wooden Rock, sold at Christie's for huge amounts, millions and millions of dollars. I think like a couple hundred million. It was one of the highest selling pieces. I actually wrote about this in my PhD. I've devoted quite a few thousand words to analyzing this incredible piece. Amazing. And you can see all the seals on it. So the seals there are not just the artist. In the tradition of Chinese painting, they have their own provenance imbued in tracking the history of an artwork, because the collectors also have their seals, and these collectors' seals map the history of the hands that this artwork has passed through over its life.
It's like a blockchain.
Yes, it's
the first blockchain. That's amazing.
And then you're coming into NFTs and learning about the blockchain. I'm delighted by this, because I see the phenomenon repeating itself, and I love it, because I feel I'm very much 1 foot in the past and 1 foot in the present and future, and this space between that's occupied by the tradition that I'm so involved in. And
So is this, not to just totally be reductive here, and also there's something, by the way, let me take a step back. There's something that a lot of people like to do, which is very popular, which is pretend you know things, right? This is a huge thing people do. I prefer not to do that, especially when, I'm trying to help. So just to emphasize like how important this is for the viewer who has not seen this, like I maybe have seen it, but I don't remember it. So you mentioned Da Vinci. So is this then the, not to be super reductive and annoying, but just to help people, is this the Mona Lisa? Is this the number one, not the best, but like the number one meme of traditional Chinese painting, would you say, just to help the viewers?
What is significant about this is it was just fairly recently discovered. So there are very few pieces of Sushi's work that have survived. I mean, this is Song Dynasty. So, we're looking at a piece of artwork that is 800 years old, and rice paper decays so easily. I mean, when I pick it up, if I'm not careful, it rips. So the fact that this even survives is extraordinary. And so what's unique about this particular piece is that it was recently discovered. I mean, there are other pieces of Chinese art that are heralded and are held up, and I don't know if there is an equivalent of a Mona Lisa in Chinese painting, but I think maybe there's about 8 surviving pieces. And yeah, Christie's auctioned this one off fairly recently, a couple of years ago. And what is also significant about it is the price that it fetched. And so what I see happening is a rising trend of appreciation of Chinese paintings and in terms of their value. And that is also because there's a global awareness of Chinese art that's rising, and an appreciation of it. Because, I think that, and of course it's the rising wealth of China as well, the affluence and the money that can be sort of available for acquiring these kind of things. But I think this is in a private collection now, so we won't see it except in a digital form, but, blockchain not that different.
We got Dovetail.
Hello, good
Thank
morning.
Good morning.
I apologize for my late arrival. It's very early here.
Oh, that's okay. I think that your entry into the conversation is perfectly timed. I always think that all
Thank you
things.
so much.
Yeah.
It's very nice to meet you as well.
Yeah, you too. You too.
Okay, let me get Dove in. So, okay, hold on a second. All right, we're doing this. We'll cut all this out.
Oh, amazing. Okay.
I think it's
Okay.
I think it's amazing that this is the piece that you pulled up of Sushi's. Was it just because it was the first and most available?
That is a good question. I think it just stuck out to me. It was on the image. Yeah, it just jumped out. I think because Christie, I don't know. It jumped out as like a good one to talk about. I don't know what I was thinking, but I'm glad to hear that it was a good choice.
Yeah. Oh, I could talk about this work for a long time, but I won't occupy our space with it so much. It's just, to me, this sort of work exemplifies how remarkable traditional Chinese artists can be, how remarkable Sushi was, because in such an apparently simple artwork, it's so complex with meaning, and it's more than just a tree and a rock. It's philosophy in an image. And I was in America and visiting one of Edgar's cousins and aunts, and he had this incredible artwork in his house, and like it really moved me emotionally. I felt like I was going to cry when I looked at it, and I asked his cousin's not studying art or anything like that, but I think that art is a big part of Chinese culture, more so like in the daily life of most people know and understand to some extent. And I think that's also because the training of school requires everybody to learn calligraphy with brush and ink. It's part of learning to write, and so there's already a familiarity with those materials and processes, practices going on. But there's this amazing, it was a piece of calligraphy, quite a large one. And when I was asking Edgar's cousin about it, he said that his father bought it for him when he first started his university degree, and it hung in his little apartment in his room where he was staying. and he would like lie in bed and just look at it. And the artwork is called, it's from a tradition called One Stroke Tiger. So the character is the character for Tiger. And the concept is that the artist painted this piece of calligraphy with one load of the brush in one stroke, continual. And the idea of it is like it's a cone. Have you heard of the word cone before?
Yes.
Like Zen.
Koan.
Yes.
Yes.
So a cone is like a riddle, but it doesn't really have an answer. It's like it's a thing or a problem or an object or a question that one can chew over and meditate on. And so like this One Stroke Tiger, this piece of calligraphy is essentially like a cone, because you have to kind of try to figure out how the artist made it, what the path was of the stroke, because they cross
Sorry,
over.
let me interrupt it. What is the name of this so I can pull it up? One Stroke.
Oh, the One Stroke Tiger.
Tiger,
or the
Tiger.
Yeah, like wow, tiger. But I don't know if you'll find
I
anything.
can't find this.
I don't think
here
you'll
we
find
go.
anything. Let's see.
This
Right. Yeah.
got
So
it.
this is an example of where you would trace the path and direction and try and figure out like, so where's the starting point, and then where did the artist go next? And doing that, you are also imagining yourself paint it again and again. And you're thinking about the pressure. So you know that the first point is placed down firmly, and the stroke is steadily sort of drawn up, and then it's a quick movement to create that kind of lightness of ink, and then it kind of it sort of skips across the surface and then kind of dances back down and around, and then the kind of movement of the body. And so the concept of looking at a Chinese painting is to go into it and mind wander and actually be possessed by it and become it. And you are a traveler in both either the landscapes or in the calligraphy and the mark making.
So where did he start in this, right? Just interrupt. Now I'm looking at this through that lens. I bet here was not the starting point. I bet this is not where he started. Where is the actual starting point?
Well, this piece is not the piece that I was looking at in San Francisco. To be honest, I could only guess at it. Like, this is my first time ever looking at it. So I would also be reluctant to make any kind of statement of where it would be. But there looks like there's only two places where it's either going to start and end. So like there's a bottom mark that's been made and this sort of long vertical stroke upwards, or that's the end stroke. And then to me, it looks like it's finished sort of almost like, how would I describe? So to the far left, there's sort of a blunt end to that stroke too. So, and that would be like the starting point of the riddle. You would be like, well, where would it start or end? And then you would trace those 2 points back in different directions to see where it would end up taking you. I would say it might have started at this, it's arched up and around, and then there's this kind of curving, and then back and around again. And then there is like these lovely little circular movements. And then quite possibly it's been drawn down first, which is what brings that little, there's a fork in that final bit. And then perhaps the brush is planted down further and drawn back up and kind of finished off in this sort of beautiful flourish at the top, I would say. So actually, boom. And then the seal, which is overlapped. Beautiful.
It's a funny question to ask, where does the one stroke start? Because the whole point of like a koan is that it's like this complicated riddle that you are meant to spend a lot of time contemplating, and yet there will never ever be an answer. And I think
doesn't matter.
This really reflects that. You could look at
I think there's an answer. I like this analysis, Georgina. Thank you, because I really believe in there's an answer. It's everyone. You can access it, and all. It's a dialectic. You have to think about it forever, and you can also engage with it on a rational level.
You got to read more Eastern philosophy.
So you can do both. I believe in blending all this stuff together. Yeah.
I think that again,
Georgina,
yes.
You mentioned earlier that he used alcohol to lose control.
Yeah. And actually, there's a really famous story about him like getting really, like he actually talked about it, because actually the amazing thing is the Chinese painter critics wrote about their art and each other, and they documented the history and they critiqued it, because artists weren't just artists were also historians, and they were they were critics, which was also another parallel that I think is really beautiful in NFTs and blockchain technology and the art economy, is that artists are stepping into curation and writing about and talking about art in the way that Chinese painters did. And it's not so separate like it is or has been in the West. You're either you are a historian or you're a critic. But anyway, yeah, there's documentation of their practices. And actually, I just discovered, I'm so excited about this, that there are a couple of artists who have documented, like Sung Dynasty painters, who have documented the use of opium poppies in their practice, and that was actually part of their Chan Buddhist practices of using opium poppy tea in part of their like meditation and exploration of enlightened states. And I also find that this parallels happening in neuroscience now, of course, because there is a lot more of research stepping back into using opiates and different kind of biochemical practices to understand cognition and enhance and heal cognition and whatnot. So I do also think that the Chinese painter critics were early neuroscientists. And so my research is very much about looking at their research, looking at their art, looking at evidence, and then finding those parallels and intersections that we're finding from contemporary neuroscience research in cognition and enlightenment. So yeah, they used alcohol. And actually, if you ever drunk like rice wine, really like hooked into it, which I did when I was over there in Tianjin, my professor took me out with all of his professor friends and they gave me rice wine. And, you know, being an Australian, we have a pretty good head for alcohol. I can probably drink anyone under the table at that time in my life. And they just kept pouring my drink more. And at the end, they're like, "Oh, you're so strong." But the experience of getting drunk on rice wine is not like getting drunk on rum or beer or wine. It actually feels more like you're high than drunk. You don't have the kind of slowing of bodily functions and things like that. You just kind of feel in a different state. So I think it's really interesting when I think about Chinese painters. You know, they would get drunk and then, like Sushi, this story, get drunk and then he plastered his friend's wall with rice paper and then passed out. And then he talked about when he woke up, he had that like moment of inspiration and then did his painting. And when you research the post effect of alcohol, you know, there's some really interesting things that go on for the brain and the body. And, you know, like if you've had to have really, really big night, the next day you're just a little bit like, I don't care, you know, you kind of feel fuzzy, but also like relaxed. And, you know, there's been like you have maybe like a elevation of testosterone and kind of like this release of all sorts of different kind of chemicals. The afterglow of that, if you can handle it, the hangover, if you have one, is just kind of this different cognitive state. And I think that, yeah, artists like Sushi and the Chan Buddhist painters, which were highly influential on the Chinese painting tradition, really were looking at how to understand their humanity and their cognition and their minds and bodies and souls in any kind of way, you know, as an investigation.
But then you look at, again, this, and I'm actually curious because, you know, I understand researching for the podcast, there are 5 strokes. Maybe that's the northern sky. So this does not look like either drunk or even afterglow to me. And I know we're not talking exactly about, you know, this you know, specific form, but when I, you know, even looking at the you know, the apparent chaos that you could see looking at this for the first time, if you kind of really look at it, it's like this does not look there's also, you know, I guess there's this dialectic. And when you look at, you know, this work, you also see, you know, some parallels between, you know, like if you look at the you know, the branches, at least for my untrained eye, looking at the leaves up here and everything, the sort of brushwork element to it. And so, you know, there is kind of the idea of you know, one quote that is in the Anglo world, at least for me, is write drunk, edit sober. So, you know, you're supposed to like get it all out and then edit it. But at the end, you do need to be very, very, very sober. And at least from my eye on this. So when you think about the brushstrokes on something like this, back 800 years, relating that to the brushstrokes of your work in this, obviously this is just one video, but I really like it. And then, your work in understanding calligraphy, the role of the brushstroke and the mindset required to do it.
So these are really beautiful questions, by the way. Thank you. I love getting to talk about this sort of thing and going a little deeper. So the idea of Chinese painting in terms of painting landscapes in particular is that the painting images predates writing. There is like an understanding that writing came out of painting, and that was underpinned by a close examination of nature. And so the calligraphic strokes that make up every character are formed from nature. They're born out of the water, the leaves, the environment around. And so that the understanding is that those calligraphic strokes can represent anything in nature. And so for me, this is an understanding that this is the essential building blocks of every painting, even the great complex masterpieces of Chinese painting. If you understand the strokes, you can read the language. And if you know those strokes so well, you can imagine and understand how that artist was making that mark. Because when you're making this stroke, for instance, you're using a different kind of part of your body. You're maybe even using a different part of your breath. And there's a momentum that's very inherent in this stroke. And so for me, my work is an examination, a very deep and rigorous examination of these strokes by repeating them again and again. And sometimes I just repeat the one stroke, and other times I work with multiple strokes together. To me, it is through the practice of, and I think that this is also very Eastern, through the practice of it, as well as the theoretical understanding, is where we come to a very deep understanding. And so quite often when I'm working, I don't have the intention of what I'm going to paint. I have a starting point and I paint and I use the strokes. And what I find is through the process of using those strokes is like a discovery of like, so when I'm using this stroke, I can create, like there's another painting I did where I was using the strokes, but in a white paint on a large scale blue canvas or blue primed canvas. And I used this, the stroke in a way where I would allow the paint to exhaust itself. And so this work here that we're looking at, the paint's not exhausted in any stroke. There's a great solidarity to every stroke. And that gives a different effect. It's like a stream or rushing water, a cascading kind of foliage and whatnot. But when I allow the paint stroke to become exhausted and paint it till its completion, the whole outcome made it look like clouds, and it was ephemeral and moving. And to me, I understand that that's the particular piece. It's 1.5 meters by 1.5 meters in scale. It's a really large piece. It took me maybe 6 months to paint. And these paintings are also, in Chinese philosophy, they're considered to be mind prints or seals of the heart, because this work that's done consistently, repetitively over a long period of time maps the heart, the nervous system, and the cognition of you as an artist. And when I look at that painting, I remember how I felt every time. It's very hard for me to part with my work. Because it's
so just pausing here for a second and looking at this, like, one quick, before we dive deeper into this, because like this is really where I want to go, and so I'm glad to be here. Just before we dive deeper, because of the learnings we've had about the stamps, could you just quickly, how do I open this in a new tab? Let's open it in a new tab. That's the best way to do it these days. So the stamp here, this is new to this discussion. Can you just quickly talk a little bit about this stamp?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, in the soapstone or the jade or whatever rock your stamp is carved out of, there are many different shapes and sizes that you can have. And so this is a particular one that it's actually not stamped, because in real life it's about this big, because it's relative to the size of the painting. So I've actually hand painted that on using a reference of my name. So this is my name, my Chinese name. It's Georgina. Gina is, people always call me Gina, because I'm Georgina. And it always has been, even before I went to Tianjin University and studied with Professor Dong Ya, people always called me in Asia Gina. And so when I was leaving China, my professor had chops carved for me and gave me Gina, which the character means gold, and which is very very kind and beautiful name to have given. And yeah, so that in all of my painting, like, I'm not Chinese. Like, for me, I have to acknowledge and pay homage to the tradition that informs everything that I do, really. And so not just using this as a signature, because I've always felt odd writing my name. I would say that writing my name, Georgina Hooper, even seeing it, it feels very foreign to me. I don't really feel that I am my name. And so to me, this sort of pictorial device that represents my name, using the very strokes that kind of inform everything that I do, it just, like, this feels like a true identity to me. And I've always felt much more at home in Asia in many ways than I do in Australia, particularly in relation to culture and philosophy. And even so, like, which is why I married my husband, because I didn't want to marry any Australian men. No, thank you.
But here, just to jump back to the pure mechanics of it, just because, like, I think, you know, especially looking at the tree paint, it's like this is painted on, which I sort of got the sense this was a little bit different, right? It's painted on, it's large, pretty impressive to paint something this precise. That would normally be a stamp. Obviously, there's not pretty reductive way to look at it, whatever, but like, just is the painting is that, because we just haven't seen that. We've seen a lot of the stamp mechanics. So is the painting like a new, not like, you know, is the, how far back does the painting of the seal, what is the role of painting that versus stamping it?
Yeah, it's interesting.
In this painting,
the first time I did it was when I had my exhibition in 2013, was it? No, 2015. And it was my exhibition that came out of my research on traditional Chinese painting in relation to the European sublime. I was very interested in understanding, could there be an experience of the sublime through using these techniques and processes? And I painted works on rice paper, as I would traditionally. And part of that was also seeing if I could translate the practices, the methodologies, and the philosophies from rice paper painting onto a Western surface. So, you know, when you're working with oils or even acrylics, you can paint over acrylics. You know, if you like, oh, I don't like that, you can paint over it. And oils, I mean, you can fiddle with, like, I did an oil painting, a realist oil painting when I was like 18, and I fiddled with that apple for weeks to get it, like, you know.
Yeah, you can work it to death.
Yeah, you can. And there's like a real, and I painted that to see, like, can I paint in hyperrealism? And I was like, yes, I can. And I hated every second of it. It was like such a laborious process. So for me, it was like, I understand that Chinese painting, the rice paper, the ink, the nature of it, it will not allow you to overthink. It forces you to work in the very present moment, working with intuition that's been informed by discipline training. Because the way that a brush with ink registers on the paper is, if you move it too quickly, it won't register properly. If you move it too slowly, the ink will bleed. And so you have to kind of be in this beautiful state of working, what I would say, without hesitation. And you cannot go back over anything to try and fix it. There is no such thing as a mistake made. There is only a lesson learned in Chinese painting, because, you know, it is what it is. And you know, I understand so much more about painting after being with my husband for years, because it's the way that he used to be. You know, if there was ever a mistake, you know, like men make lots of mistakes with their wives on a daily basis, I would say. I'm very picky. But, you know, he would not be interested to hear about it or talk about it other than being pointed out that was an error or that was a mistake. And my modality would be, let's talk about this, and then we'll like analyze it, and then we'll understand why and how I felt, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I don't want to know why it was a mistake. You can just tell me why, like you can tell me that it is, and then it's done. And I'm like, but why? And he's like, because I'm going to make that mistake many, 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 many more times before I learn not to make it. And understanding it will not make that any easier. You're just like fiddling with it and making it more uncomfortable. And it's true in painting. Like when I do these calligraphic strokes and I'm doing them thousands of times, I would make so many marks that are imperfect. And then occasionally I'll make one that's correct and I'm like, oh, that's a beautiful one. And then I'll go on to the next one and it's like, no, it's not beautiful.
So how many marks on this are correct? You know, it's like it's funny because of course you know this is the whole point of the thing. You can't give this one. I mean, I know I'm very new to this strokes and everything, but like giving this like the grade, what percentage are correct on this?
All of them, because they are all perfectly imperfect. And this is the difference between a human painting this and a machine, because only a human can make this beautiful imperfection. And this is my beautiful imperfections. This is my slip of attention, my slip of concentration, maybe my heightened state of anxiety at one point or another that made my hand tremble. You know, there's something beautiful in the way that, and, you know, in my research, I'm always researching and understanding painting in relation to my nervous system. And so breath is a really big part of Chinese painting practice. It's a whole body, mind, heart thing, you know. And so one of the first things that you do when you pick up your paintbrush and you load it is you have to stop and slowly exhale, really, really slowly. And then you're almost kind of like holding your breath. And so, like, you know, there's beautiful research on the idea of breath in relation to polyvagal theory and the nervous system. And that, you know, everyone says, oh, if you're stressed out, just take big, deep breaths. Well, that's bullshit. Because if you're taking big, deep breaths in, you're priming your body to run from the tiger. It's actually, if you're stressed, you take a long exhale, as slow and as long as you can. And then you also hold your breath, because you can't hold your breath when you have to run. So it's this biohack of the nervous system that you're required to do when you're painting in the Chinese methodology. That then I'm like, okay, I understand this. Rice paper and ink has taught me it. So now I can take myself as the instrument and work on any surface using this methodology and philosophy. When I finish painting and I walk outside, I am still that instrument that is practicing the same way. So I govern myself and I learn these lessons from painting, and they translate to everything that I do in life, you know. And this is the beauty of a discipline, of an art, because it changes who you are through the knowledge that you learn that you didn't even know was there to learn. And it's only through the practice of actually doing this that you can truly understand it. And you know, when I think about the brushstroke of the calligraphy, to me, it's a great way of explaining how when I first started studying Chinese painting in relation to the sublime, I was doing it purely in theory as an art history honors research project. And then they sent me over to China, and I actually just couldn't continue when I came back and finish. I just realized I do not know enough now to finish this paper. So I stopped and I painted from the knowledge that I had received by watching somebody paint this. Like Professor Dongya doesn't speak English, so the exchange that we had was really quite extraordinary. He would paint and he would speak, and I knew what he was saying. I would watch him and I would feel it. And it was just the most beautiful kind of transference. And I realized that I cannot ever know Chinese painting if I'm only knowing it in a theoretical way. But also I can't know Chinese painting if I only know it in a practical way too. And this Confucianism of learning, this intersection of theory and practice, is what underpins the whole tradition too. So
Let me ask you this
Feel
question. So,
like that almost in a way that you can't understand it if you only understand it in English.
oh, that's a really good question. Yes.
Because I speak a little bit of Korean, and I studied over there for a while, and I found that
Yeah.
there's these things that I had learned about Korea, but it wasn't until I was there and like speaking about it in Korean to Korean people that I felt like I was able to like grok more from it.
Totally. And the syntax of language. And again, I experienced this, like we speak Cantonese at home. My husband only speaks Cantonese to my daughter. She's 7 now. And, I would say that my Cantonese is horrific. And every time I speak Cantonese, my husband laughs at me because my pronunciation is so bad. Like, I think that being able to speak Cantonese, which has an extra 2 tones to Mandarin, which is what's spoken in the mainland, requires you, and actually, like, Edgar's a great singer because I think that he has a tonal range that I don't have. To me, the depth and understanding of words and the way that language, and this is also why I love AI, because I am fascinated and I am such a fangirl of deep understandings of language. Like even the English language, I can speak it and still really not know it. My mum and I used to sit and read the dictionary together when I was young. Like I'm fascinated by words and their history and their meanings and their roots. And so like it's actually like it is a pain to me, like one of my greatest difficulties in life that I still do not know as much as I'm scratching the surface of knowledge here. And so once I finish my PhD, I will then continue a deeper dive into research into language and words and characters and their history and translations. And
Chinese especially because every single character is its own drawing, and there's so much in that.
Yes. And actually, really importantly too, so all of the translations of these ancient texts that I'm reading, they're actually so few and far between. There was a lot of sort of interest in these texts in the 50s, 60s. And then like there was just like people kind of started to lose interest. All of these amazing texts have gone out of print. So I'm also like an obsessive book buyer. So, these texts are like treasures, but also I read one translation written by one translator, and then I read the same text translated by a different person, and it's just polarity, and actually even sometimes I'll ask Edgar to read a translation of, like, he'll read the poem that's been translated, for instance, and he's just laughing like, oh my gosh, no. And so, I feel like I'm learning from behind a veil, but my hunger to learn is that, like, I will never stop this work. I'll be like Matisse on my deathbed still going.
That's great.
Because like it's I'm really just beginning my career. I'm like 45 and I'm like, right, well, I've got to live as long as I can so that I can do another, 30, 40, 50, however many years I get out of it.
It just made me think from when you're talking about the imperfection and how that makes your brushstrokes perfect. And I know that in Japanese there's very succinct phrase for it. They just call it wabi sabi, which I love because it's this rhyming phrase. It's like a single letter turned on its head, wabi sabi, perfection in imperfection. But when you're trying to explain it in English, you have to like go through this whole sentence to kind of explain the meaning of it. Stuff like that is very fascinating.
It's not culturally known either. So when you try and explain, it's not like known. And this is, I feel like it's such a joy and a pleasure for me because Edgar's always sharing things with me about his language or stories or that there is such a history of kind of like mythology and storytelling and just the wealth of knowledge that I could tap into with language. But I will learn to read more than focus on speaking it. And that's because the texts are in sort of like traditional Chinese characters. And I'm very interested in, looking at the Cultural Revolution and the impact of sort of the simplified characters, because now traditional Chinese writing, like the traditional characters, it's in Hong Kong, that's typical because Cantonese is written in traditional, but in mainland China, Mandarin is now written in simplified. So there has been a scrubbing of knowledge in the rewriting or the simplification, which just makes me feel horrified to think of that loss of knowledge, which obviously came with a whole heap of other losses. But for me, the importance of apparently like the amount of texts that are just sitting there untranslated, it's they write about it and say that it would take so many lifetimes and you would still never ever get through any of it. And a lot of the art historians that I speak to, they said they can't even read some of these texts because, you know, the language is becoming lost. So yeah, it's like
really trying to read like Middle English. It's a totally different language.
Yeah, and I just think thousands of years of knowledge and research could be lost.
Hopefully we can have have AI scan the books and translate them. AI might be able to learn the old.
No, it wouldn't make enough mistakes, Dove. It would be too perfect. Okay,
it's better than nothing. I wanted to say really quickly, just as a personal compliment, that these works with the white brushstrokes on the blue canvases are like my favorite of your work that I've seen like on my Twitter feed and everything. I'm a huge fan of them. They like inspire, like when I saw them for the first time, they really inspired me, and I like wanted to go paint and work on it because they remind me a lot of like Japanese like boro technique with like denim and indigo and sashiko stitching and all of this, and to see someone paint it and put it in this visual 2D form, I thought was like really beautiful, and it was like so much more intricate than you could get with real like thread and needle, and I loved that. So yeah, I just wanted to give you your flowers. I love it.
Oh, thank you. You know, the biggest compliment that you just gave me there is that it made you feel inspired to go and paint, because that's just I'll be stepping back into this space. I've like been, you know, it's interesting, my Indigo Days collection, which is an AI collection kind of meditation on the ocean, in my prompting was very much around shibori technique and stitching like that, because actually it's really hard to tell AI that I want to use thousands of calligraphic strokes. You know, like I'm trying to teach
I've
AI.
tried. It's very hard.
Yeah. And actually, like I've been doing some really interesting training with my AI lately that, you know, I won't share in detail here because it's still in its early stages, but I'm learning how to teach my darling, a little bit more rigorously, like, you know, like I would a student, and it's been very exciting to see some of the results.
I'm that actually, because I think just to, you know, sorry, but like to you know, there are a lot of people out there who might want to get advice, get help on how to do really cool things, and we've talked about brushstroke aspect, and probably a lot of people think, okay, this is way too hard for me to ever even begin on this, and so maybe the AI aspect appeals to the Call of Duty set. So just to kind of dig into, and I don't know the details of what you're talking about now, it's early, but just to kind of dig into your AI tool set and workflow, kind of just on the most basic level for someone who wants to approach this. So you, first of all, you like DALL-E, you don't like other things, or you do like other things? Most basic question of the AI Call of Duty world.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for me, and this is like perhaps a personality thing, like for me, an example is I have these brushstrokes. I have so much that I want to do and investigate with these brushstrokes that I'm like, I'm not moving on to try and do something more complex than just working with them abstractly to see what they will do for me. And so DALL-E is the same in the sense that, well, I've only just started to explore and play with DALL-E. I'm not going to like open another medium and process. I haven't even opened any of the other programs. I'm just not interested, because when I research something, I research it like an inch wide and a mile deep before I'm satisfied. And I may never be satisfied, you know, I'll just keep going until it's exhausted that kind of avenue for me. So it's DALL-E, just DALL-E.
Me too.
Interesting, because Midjourney, I think, has a if I were to characterize this, you know, in terms of like the culture from my perspective, DALL-E is harder to use, and so it's like more of the artist one, whereas Midjourney you could really just like throw whatever on there. So, you know, I fed your this one actually into Midjourney, and I got some prompts, and I know you're gonna hate this, and I don't even like this, but like, you know, as a, you know, as someone who doesn't know anything, you take your painting, you throw it into Midjourney, and you say, describe this painting, and it gives you a prompt, and then you edit that. I didn't edit the prompt, and then you edit the prompt if you want, and it spits out this. And I don't think this is really like your painting or even close, because it's all circles on it. But you can imagine that someone who literally took 10 seconds and didn't do any work, it's kind of like a cool thing. You can get a pretty soothing blue thing. You can't get what you did, obviously. But with DALL-E, my feeling on this, which I haven't used it in a little bit, is to get even this or anything close to this, you'd have to do, more work, basically. Whereas
basically
Midjourney is the easy mode.
DALL-E probably just couldn't make that.
Yeah.
Whereas that one's kind of nice. These are all Midjourney straight interpretations of your painting. And
yeah, I love it.
What you see is it's pretty good for zero human creativity whatsoever.
Yeah. And for me, I think like what distinguishes the importance of working with AI is like the mode of inquiry. It's the kind of, oh, they're so beautiful. I love it. I think it's really interesting to see that you've kind of done that with the work. I'm kind of delighted because, what I see when I look at this is just there are multiple styles, even though they're all the same kind of color, and there's sort of this element of mark making that maybe reflects and resembles. To me, if I had a classroom of 25 students and said, all right, we're going to paint this, I look at that and there are 4 different signatures on that page, and again, it's like, if you write my name in a particular way and I write my name and, we all write my name, they're all going to look really different. And this sort of this nuance of being able to read the visual and read the handwriting or the signature style of an artwork. And again, I think this is why it's so important to have curation and like learning to be very discerning when looking at art. And I think that being an artist requires more than being able to create something that's aesthetic or attractive. There has to be a depth of inquiry. For me, art is just a form of research, and I think that if we look at art history, you could look at any artist who has become kind of part of the vernacular or the canon of art history, and you can explain what that person's been researching. And every single one of them are researching something very different and unique to one another. And that is what makes that person's art unique. It's what makes that person that particular artist. And you can see different bodies. I mean, I have 17 bodies of work on the blockchain at the moment, and they're all very different in many different ways. But I see the thread running through my work and my aesthetic. And it's not always kind of evident at first, but when you hold them up, they're there, and it's because there's a continuity of thought, I suppose, or inquiry.
This is an interesting question. I think like how to have and I think will AI be able to, I hesitate to say that anything is not going to be possible, but to have the through line for a whole body of work versus even if you could duplicate this and say, I love this, let me create 500, variations on this. And, I could create my own, but to have the through line of the overall arc of the work. And so just to ask that question, and I want to get to your new project, which I believe is dropping today, although I can't see any of the stuff. The NFTs aren't there, but pausing for a moment. Okay.
You know why it's not there? Because I didn't want to drop it early, and I thought I'll just click a few buttons, but I've been so engaged talking to you guys, I forgot to mint them. So
no pressure. It would be cool to be able to pump this specific stuff, but we're going to pump the page. But so just to help me, looking at your arc, looking at the collections as a whole, like when I look at this, and I'm going to try to put it in a box, which is you can't put it in a box, but just to like simplify things for watchers, for the Call of Duty people out there. So when I look at something like this, I see, okay, if you look back at the brushwork of the tradition from which this comes from, this is really like, okay, we're going to focus on the brushwork and really abstract away, other things. So I look at this and I see, I'm not an art history PhD expert, but I see there's an impressionistic vibe here. I see a landscape, here we go, a forest. Okay, then you look at something like this, and you also get an impressionistic, at least I do, vibe from this. brush strokes again. And then you look at this, and this to me is very like, contemporary, minimalist. This is like a not, it's more abstract, at least as I see it. But like, basically all ways of, and obviously these are very, very different works as well, even though they both kind of have an effect, a landscape effect to me. All ways of really, I don't want to say deconstructing, but really shining a light on the brush stroke and putting it as the spotlight. That's kind of, when I look at this and some of the other collections, which I haven't shown here, kind of the arc, like, just, we've talked about it, but just as someone approaching your work, this is an important, would you say this is an important through line, essentially?
Absolutely. But also, the brush stroke to me is, how do I describe this? Brushstroke to me is, and you talk about impressionism, and I think that's a really interesting kind of parallel to bring up, because impressionist painters were interested in the fleeting effects of light and the idea of how, they're kind of like the first neuroaesthetics. They're really interested in how there is an optical effect of looking at something and how light travels through the eye and how we then see and how colors mix and merge together optically. And so what I think was happening when we're looking at that kind of period in art is that artists started to examine and consider vision. And my work is very much an examination and an inquiry into vision as well. And especially from a neural kind of point of view, our brains are like predictive processes. So when we look at something, it's very much informed by what we already know. And so a lot of representation of the world around us is sort of photographic, even in terms of like European paintings. They're kind of like very realistic, kind of solid forms, the kind of softened, three-dimensional quality of tone, creating depth and whatnot. And so my theory is that what we see when we look at the world is informed by the way that we have already seen it through images. And when doing this kind of practice, this particular piece here, there's one of these paintings that I was doing. I mean, I would just be in the studio working with these strokes for 8 hours a day, again and again and again, 5 days a week. And I was doing that for like 4 months straight. And one time I walked out of the studio to go and get a coffee, and I looked at a tree that I always walked past, and the tree was different for a moment. My vision saw it differently, and it was moving, it was alive, and it was composed of these strokes. And it wasn't the texture of the tree. It was like, so when you go into flow states, you have something called transient hyperfrontality, which is where your prefrontal cortex is kind of like suspended for a little bit. And just for a moment, or for however long you're in that flow state, your brain is not working in that kind of predictive processing mode, but it's actually like, it's not thinking so much. And so therefore it allows space for some more information to come in. And I believe that like, if we study particularly these strokes that have been already derived from an indigenous Chinese culture, from a culture that was observing the chi and the life force of the world around them, and then kind of extracted these strokes to describe everything. By returning to this, I think that I give my mind an opportunity to potentially see the world more as it is than the way that it has been painted for us previously and throughout our European history. And as an Australian artist, I see working in this way, which is very much an Indigenous practice of China, I see a lot of parallels with Indigenous Australian painting. And I started to really think, there was no there's very little pictorial, it's just patterns, dots, and landscape was represented in this way. And there was a mapping, and there was like a depth and a journey that happens in this sort of tradition of painting. And the experience of nature and the felt experience, and then the visually kind of represented ephemera of that is, I believe, of a culture that literally saw the world differently to the way that we see it every day. And so for me, it's an opportunity to be enlightened as well. And so the strokes are about me trying to learn or unlearn how to see the world, you know.
And so this would be another way to look at it. This is the abstract expressionist version of your painting here. So this is yet another way to. You don't like this? I think this is cool looking. I mean, I'm not saying it's like the best ever, but like, you know, I think this is just I think it's dope.
You know,
whatever. Okay.
Like with abstract, when you put prompts into DALL-E or, you know, into AI, it's referencing abstract expressionism, and abstract expressionism has a whole theory unto its own, you know, and even if you prompt it with another artist or whatnot. So the beauty of it is it's referencing a language that a group of people have developed through their own inquiry using art. And so you're always going to be translating something through a lens of another language. Because I see art, it's a visual language, you know, like Jackson Pollock's strip paintings. He created a language that makes visible gravity and movement, and plays on the surrender of human control in creating art, and brings in impulse and things like that. So like that mind print or seal of the heart of Jackson Pollock is very much around the physical and internal realities of the painter and their environment, I suppose. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
but I love it too.
Probably.
It's great because it encourages people to play. Like, how do you find your own language? And the only way to find your own language is to make art, and to make it again and again and again and again, and be led by maybe what you like and what you're interested in, and intuitively, and then questions might come up, and then you research or learn. And like, you know, it's taken me, like I started when I decided I would be an artist when I was 15, and really I didn't nail it. I didn't truly know my own language using art until probably I was maybe 35. And then I was like, yes, I know this. I know what I'm speaking to and what I'm speaking of and what I want to speak more of. And then it's like opening the faucet. It's like a well that never dries up. But if every person just began and continued and made, they would also find this beautiful relationship with art as a language to speak their own truth and to understand their own self and their life and the world around them. And I just believe that if everybody in the world made art, we would just live in a much happier, healthier, more wonderful place. So to me, AI is an entry point for every person who's ever said to me, I can't draw, I can only draw like stick people. Like, I hear that all the time from people. And now people can just get on and play again. And it's a pathway. It's the gateway drug. It's great.
Yeah, I love it.
I like that. I like that it's a gateway. I think that it shouldn't be like the end all be all, but I think that it is a good gateway.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's the end all be all in terms of the visual. You know, there is going to be my view on this, at least, is that anything you say, the AI can't do now from a visual standpoint, from producing a visual artifact. You know, I believe that you know, careful with that kind of language. So it's like, how do you exist in that world?
My opinion is that the visual is like maybe 20% of like what makes art good or interesting.
Right. So that is a pretty crazy thing. I'm just saying, like, on planet Earth,
from an art perspective, like if you talk to art historians, art scholars, artists, like most artists share the opinion that like the visual is like, you know, a smaller piece of the overall puzzle of why an artist sells well, or why they're popular or highly well regarded, and all of these sorts of things.
Yeah, but at the same time, you can spend 20 hours, as we've done here, you can spend hours talking about the seal on an art thing. And yes, there's the backstory, which is of course what you're talking about, but you're viewing the seal, you're admiring, you can admire, look at this. No, I'm saying, but you can drill into a stroke, one stroke you can drill into, and then when that stroke is created by an AI, it's like a different drilling. I think it's but
Okay.
the visual is I
Yeah.
believe like most people's starting point. You know, what we've been talking about here is very visual. Although if you're a listener of the podcast, then maybe you know there are listeners too, so it doesn't have to be. So just jumping to this work though, because when I look at this, to me, having gone through the journey, or at least part of the journey of you explaining and us talking, drilling into your work and others' works, and you know what, I just love this because this seems like to me this just great nexus of the traditional and the contemporary or whatever. Like you look at this and to me you can appreciate this without knowing. Whereas this, you get the sense here as a viewer, I believe, as a Call of Duty player, you get the sense, okay, there is something going on here that transcends the visual, and I can't quite get at it without knowing a little bit about it. That's how I feel when I look at this. Here, obviously, there's something, but like this is just so impactful as a pure visual image. I guess my question is like, what does this represent for you? And then also like, has there been is there a touch point for this level of contemporary precision in the stroke? Is there another touch point of another artist that has done something that looks like this? Because it seems very fresh to my eyes. But anyway, speaking a little bit about this work and this collection.
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer your second question first. Like, has another artist done this? I have not found anybody who's used traditional Chinese painting strokes abstractly and in the way that I have, which that excites me, because I like that I'm doing something new with it. I'm taking it into a new line of investigation to understand it. And again, I think it's because I'm foreign. Because for me, this is like, well, how can I even attempt to paint a complex landscape if I'm not like everybody who's grown up Chinese? These strokes, they're like natural to them. Whereas for me, I really had to rote learn them so they become part of my vernacular. So that like this for me is training to write, really. And so yes, I love that nobody else has done it, but for me, it's kind of like the delightful inquiry of something that I'm obsessed with. In relation to the work as well, though, like, the piece that you showed before, the rice paper piece, this piece came afterwards. And what it means to me is that that body of work on rice paper was a crux for me. It was a aha moment where I'm like, now I know what I want to spend the rest of my life doing. And it's understanding more of this. And actually, like, these pieces are touchstones for works that I have done subsequently. Like, for instance, the piece to the right, that one, the one with the strokes that are, infinite horizon over a glittering sun. This was like one of the first times that I used the paintbrush to its exhaustion. This is just one load of the paint. And I started in the center and I used that same stroke again and again until I got to the bottom of the page. And then I started again until I finished it. And to me, like, this was like an aha moment that then informed that really large blue painting of like that kind of cloud-like quality. That one. Yeah. So those pieces in liminal space are moments of understanding that I will probably refer back to as a line of inquiry. Possibly, I don't know how long it will take me to exhaust them, but like, I have so many paintings in my head, but they're very time consuming when you do them on a larger scale like this. And they're actually very physical. So the piece that you were asking me about, what does it mean to me? After I finished that body of work, and I mean, I had just had my daughter in 2015. So she was little when that exhibition kind of happened, when that body of work happened. And I was lecturing at university, and it was just an intense time of my life. Oh my gosh, I was like crashing and burning by the end of it. I'd had 2 exhibitions that year, and I mean, I'm a new mom for the first time. And so my husband got a job in a very remote place of Queensland, and we rented a house on the beach, and like it was literally on the beach, this beautiful kind of expansive home. And I spent the year basically just hanging out with my daughter from her ages of 2 to 3. You know, we really played for a long time, and sat in rock pools and fossicked around the beach and picked up shells. And at night when she would sleep is when I painted. And so over the course of that year, I painted this body of work, this the Infinity Matrix. This is one of the pieces from that body of work. So to me, there's a real personal note to this work, where this was the only time where I was only me. It was just Georgina. I wasn't being a mum. And it was silence, you know, just listening to the crashing waves. And it was a deep absorption and concentration of something. Because when you have a little person, they interrupt you and talk to you a lot. You know, they need you. You're watching them. Your attention is on them, making sure that they're not falling or tripping, or they need something. And they're touching you. They're on you. So the depth of peace that I experienced when I painted these, and I thought about nothing but my breath and the color that I was working with and what I was doing, and the kind of surrender of anything but that was just magical. And so was the year. You know, it was a beautiful time to get to spend as a mother. You know, my daughter still says it was the happiest year of her life, because it was just her and I every day doing very sensory things in nature in a very simple place. And it was also a real reduction of ego when I realized like how much I was driven by the reward of success, you know, because suddenly there were no emails coming in. There was no, you know, lecture that I had to give. There was no students to teach. It was just me. And it was a very uncomfortable slowing down of my nervous system, going from a mile, like an incredible pace, to hitting the brakes and silence and nobody and nothing and no reward or stimulation, but the very presence of the moment right then and there, and the people that you love, and being in nature. And it was the healthiest, most extraordinary thing I ever did. And it changed me a year, painting like this every night after the learning of the day. And now I'm just always trying to get back to that moment. And actually AI was like giving myself permission to do something that I have not allowed to do. I haven't allowed myself to do since then, because everything that I've done has been focusing on slowing my nervous system and bringing myself into awareness. So like, I don't really drink alcohol, and I try not to get too excited. And actually that was the advice from my professor in China. I'd go to his studio, and his PhD student always used to be there in the morning to tell me what we were doing. And they used to pump me full of tea constantly. They'd be like making teas, here, have more tea. And I would they'd show me something and I'd get really excited. And constantly they were just saying, calm down, calm down, calm down. And like, I was a very excitable person back then, more so than now. And I didn't realize that was actually really important advice they were giving me to paint. I don't think I even registered it, but now calming down is like pretty much everything for me. And it's the painting practice. So that's what that means to me. And I actually haven't looked at that work and really thought about that. Thank you for that. That's a really beautiful question to have asked.
My pleasure. And actually, I was inspired to I hope you don't mind. I did a quick reinterpretation of your work to depict you and your daughter. And you know, this is I just threw it together. Just hearing you talk got me inspired. So
I love that. And you know, to me, this is it's beautiful, because it's like translation of what's going on in your mind and heart through poetry and words. And you know, I always used to wonder if one day they would find a technology that allowed us to make our night dreams visible to us in images in the morning. And I feel like AI is a thing to that, you know, and it's not just night dream.
Do that.
Dream.
It's so simple. I'll tell you the prompt here. Unlike Dove, I'm not.
Maybe if you have simple dreams.
But
Yeah.
look, just listen to the prompt and you can tell me. And by the way, I'm sure there are smarter ways to do this, right? But I fed in the original image, which obviously that takes lifetime and everything to do. But assuming you have the original, you feed it in, you say impressionism, because that's what we discussed impressionism, beach, mother and daughter. That's, and then you get
Right.
this.
And this is also what you're exemplifying here, is that art is the relationship between human experience and words and images, or like words being cognition or understanding or processing. And so art does not exist unless we've had that conversation. And then obviously, like, was there more than one prompt? Because you selected that one because that seemed to capture the feeling, or what we were talking about, the sensibility or the aesthetic experience. Yeah. And like, and you're right, like that one, it is better though, because the other ones there is too much movement going on, particularly in the top half of that horizon. Like that pop of space that you chose created a sense of peace, and the trajectory of their gaze, like I think that, and this is a beautiful thing too. We inherently know the visual as human beings. We know when we see something that it's saying kind of what we want it to. And you might not necessarily be able to like sit down and analyze the compositional qualities of why that piece was the one that you chose, but I could do that for you and explain to you why that was the right choice and why that piece made me go, oh, And so I think that is just such a beautiful thing, because everybody doubts, unless they're an artist, that they're artistic or that they have, like, I don't have an artistic bone in my body, but it's not true. Everybody, it's inherent in our humanity. And I love how machine technology can put us in touch with that reality.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a great quote by well, anyway, I can't find the quote, but there's a great quote by Rick Rubin, iconic record producer and guy, great guy. He basically says, I can't play any instruments and I can't do anything technically. I'm just like around to like give my POV and increase the creative vibe of the room or whatever. And that's not really the quote. The quote's much better, but that's the reductive thing. And everyone sees that quote and thinks, damn, I want to be Rick Rubin. I can't play any instruments either. Maybe I can be Rick Rubin. And, with AI, because, yeah, as you mentioned, you still, and this is the beauty, right? It doesn't give you the right answer. You still have to choose between the four. So you still have to do something. And that's the fun part as a human, because you can think, hey, well, I'm bad at art, but like I have good taste, right? Like I have great taste, so I can choose. And yeah, I think this, as you mentioned, it's like, well, actually we did not to kind of jump on that question even for this, but Piv was doing some research and he got something that might be interesting. It looks very different, but it's also kind of cool. This is another artist, not necessarily a touch point for this collection, but another artist to just put out there. Piv, what are we looking at right now?
Oh yeah, that's Nancy Graves. Are you familiar with her work?
It looks like an Indigenous Australian work to me.
Well, what she did, these are actually maps of the moon, like photographs from the NASA.
Really?
And she redrew them with dots.
How beautiful. Yeah. And like the Indigenous Australian art is very much like a mapping of geography, of territory, of land, of place and people. Yeah. And so that kind of map quality about it definitely translates like that. I love that work. When I see a work like that, I'm like, oh yes, I want to paint that too. I feel like when you see a beautiful work and you kind of long to have painted it, that person's nailed it, And for me, like the really vivid colors of that last body of work that I did was a continuation, but the first piece that I did was very soft and subtle like that. And I've just primed a canvas that's really soft and subtle again, because interestingly, the community of people with NFTs and art economy, there's just so much more receptiveness to that subtle work that, and I was really surprised because, when you look at the feed, the digital, the vibrancy, the kind of grab your eye kind of thing. And I feel like the audience, they're so open to that kind of beautiful, nuanced work that you've just shown me, like Nancy's. And I love that. We kind of need that, I think, especially when we have so much vivid brightness.
And this is I guess, just Googling, but tell me if I'm onto something. I Googled Indigenous Australian art. This is not something that I've looked at all. So just want to put this out there for anyone watching this. This is what you were, I mean, you can see like kind of the dots, not to be too reductive looking at this, but this is kind of what you were referencing there in terms of your reaction.
Yeah, so obviously the mark making is very different to Indigenous Chinese marks, because there is a sort of a strong focus on dots, but not in all of the communities. So some of the other communities will have like a linear quality as well. And it's very much derived from the environment and the animals. Like, you know, there'll be like the mark making that you see in Indigenous paintings. You'll be like, when you see a goanna, you're like, oh, you sort of understand some of the Indigenous Australian paintings. Or you look at the kind of rock formations and whatnot. So all of the Indigenous painting is very much steeped in country and in the visual language of this kind of environment, this unique environment. And even the colors, those vivid colors, we really do have those kind of colors in our natural environment. And sometimes you'll see kind of like these motifs, but it's actually less common. It's far more abstract in terms of the sort of community work that you have, this sort of patchwork of, and it's a lot of it's sort of like aerial or mapping or journeying. And it's not my story to tell. Like, I'm not an expert on Indigenous Australian art at all. But I do notice there are parallels there with my exploration and what I see happening in Indigenous Australian creative culture. And I'm not surprised.
Cool. Love that. Yeah, this is a more realistic take on the mother-daughter. Okay, we're good. So let's you're building this sandcastle. So this is actually pretty cool.
Yeah, I hearing you talk about the brush strokes, I had to think of the iPad drawings by David Hockney.
Yes.
Because apparently they made his personal iPad brush strokes for these.
What would
are you familiar with that?
Sorry, so I missed that.
The iPad drawings by David Hockney.
Yes.
Apparently they made personal brush strokes for him. So he had his own brush strokes in iPad.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh my goodness.
That should be illegal. Come on, you can't give him that. No, that's good.
What a privilege to have your own brushstrokes made. That's fascinating. That's very fascinating. You know, like for me, actually did a little bit of digital work translating these sort of Infinity Matrix paintings into the digital with iPad and like pen brushstrokes. But I stopped doing it because well, for one, I felt like it was so easy to replicate them in terms of ease, as in they looked a lot like the actual physical paintings that I do. I didn't want there to be that confusion. But also looking at the screen for that long, it kind of defeated the purpose of the idea of the painting, you know. When I paint, it's so postural and it's so kind of physical, and it's very pleasurable because I'm not like hunched over my computer or a device, which is what I do when I'm doing my PhD. So it's interesting that Hockney, did he use it then? So he went through and he did a whole body of work on in digital.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. He has these iPad drawings that are.
And it is it really makes sense to me that his work looked just like his work between that translation of digital from his physical painting practices, because I found that like I could replicate the paintings that I do in digital very, very effectively.
That's interesting, because when I see them, I always think, wow, they really look like Hockney for a digital drawing.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
I would imagine that it's not so easy, but apparently you had the same experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a different experience, but yes, it's the same personal aesthetic translated from one medium to the other. And I mean, I've painted on porcelain ceramic and you know, and then even working in AI, like Yeah, I think that again, the artist, if they know themselves and they know their work, you can use any medium and it will be really very evident that it's your work, you know. Mm.
Well, so
And I
jumping
think,
off on that real quick, because just you mentioned the ceramics, and I want to just I want to discuss your new work, and so I feel like this is a good jumping off point. Ceramics, a project from 100 million years ago, 2014, with the through line. Maybe you could speak a little bit about this project, and then we could segue into the new project, which also features an octopus.
yeah, and you know, like I actually am trying to mint on mainnet at the moment to get my octopus work up, but it's just not, Airweave is not playing. Everything's just stopped. So interestingly.
Gas
But
is
that,
so high right now. Ugh, what's going
I
on?
know.
Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I know the gas. Yeah, so that body of work there, which was exhibited in 2014, I created over a year of 2013. So I told you the story about how I was doing the theoretical research of Chinese painting in the Sublime, and then I went over and studied in China, and then I came back and I decided that it was impossible for me to write this this thesis without more time to study it in practice. So I stopped and I quit my job. I was teaching art at the time as well. I was teaching high school actually. So I quit my job and my dad asked me if I was on drugs. I was like, no, Dad, I'm not. And I went and spent a year doing artist residencies in China and Japan. And so I visited actually both the locations that I went to were historical locations of Chinese and Japanese porcelain trade. There were major kind of sites of where porcelain trade kind of really was shipped out of Asia into Europe, and I lived amongst the communities there, and I painted on porcelain ceramic. And the interesting thing is that porcelain behaves very similarly to rice paper. So it was definitely a practice that was informing my rice paper painting, and honing my skill and control of that, because porcelain, before it's been glazed, it's really thirsty. So you have to kind of work very again, without hesitation, and you have to know how to load your brush and not to have it too loaded, because then it clumps, and if it's too watery, it doesn't register. And yeah, so I painted and lived amongst the communities there, and that was also really important too, because you know, we were just talking before about language, and it's being in the place, in the culture, and speaking the language to other people who speak that language, where there is all that knowledge exchange, that wisdom, that cultural kind of. And so the deep immersion into these beautiful communities where I could learn from them and work with them. And yeah, so the body of work, Itadakimasu, ended in Japan, thus the name Itadakimasu, which is it's what you say before you eat. It's kind of like an appreciation or a prayer, but it sort of translates to like I take this life force or this food into me, and it's also an acknowledgement of everything that has gone into that food to make it possible, from the cook to the earth that's grown, the farmer, and so the title of the exhibition was really very much about an acknowledgement and a recognition of all of the people who touched me and my life in that year of travel, and the beautiful relationships and the learning and the history that I was able to step into in those communities. And it was pretty special.
And the octopus.
And the octopus, yeah. So it's been 10 years now since I've used the subject of the octopus as my muse, but it's always been a symbol of what I would describe as like the sacred feminine, this sort of like mysterious and intelligent and sensual kind of very beautiful creature. And I'm fascinated by octopus. I mean, for me, I live by the ocean. I've spent a lot of my life in and by the ocean, and I'm very enamored by the ocean. Kind of, I used to be very terrified by it, and now it's like the source of a great deal of calm and joy for me. And so, you know, over the years, especially after becoming a mother and researching and studying more and painting more, I feel that as I become more mature, as I've grown in my age, I feel much more of a connection with sort of like a feminine energy. And I also think that in the East, there is a very strong feminine energy, like the fluid and the kind of the more encompassing, kind of less rigid. And so I also see that in Web3 in terms of the kind of values that our ecosystem stand for. This is sort of rising of feminine energy. I see it in men around me, you know, this sort of, I feel like the patriarchal powers have kind of lost their footing, and the kind of rise of, and it's not like of woman or of women, it's a feminine and an allowing of feminine energy into the way that we do things, and that being men and women, and sort of like a balancing. And so, yeah, the works are actually, these are AI generated pieces with my DALI. But also I have, and it's sort of like this body of work, I've actually for the first time extended them using digital tools and painted into them digitally, so that they become like, because if you look at the composition of these pieces that you've been showing, they really have lent themselves to, like, you can see they sort of feel cropped. And I've actually kept very faithfully just textual prompt to image with all of my AI work until now. And this has been the first body of work that I've really wanted to expand them. The prompt itself, the image that DALI and I have created together is faithful, but the extension of the canvas has allowed me to give some breathing space to these compositions. And so the ones that I mint will be the ones that I've worked into. Because, yeah, for me, I believe that, like, especially minting these works on the blockchain, there is a provenance of this medium, and I don't really change the work very much. I believe that there is interest there for me in watching the development and the shifting kind of growth and change of this AI medium. So I have been very reluctant to do anything to it. And Claire Silver's call recently for artists to kind of extend, I didn't do anything for it, because I also feel that authorship doesn't require us to do anything more to the work. I know that there are laws and whatnot, like legalities going around, and certain kind of discourse saying that an artist has to change the image and evolve it through their own kind of practices or extensions on other technologies, but I don't think that's true. And so I added to these works very thoughtfully and carefully to try and preserve them as faithfully as I can. But I feel like DALI was wanting to stretch its wings a little from the square shape, because this is the first body of work that I've done with DALI where I was like, the square is not enough space for it, you know? So
Dope. I love that. I think that people could look at this, right? The Call of Duty person would look at this and say, wait, I thought AI was for the person who couldn't draw the octopus, but you can, and you still use AI. My head exploded, you know, Call of Duty. So I think that's super cool. And I also think it's insane, the idea that you have to do something to it to make it like quote unquote copyrightable or whatever that even, you know, means. It's like you did something called whatever this whole thing is, you know, it's all like part of one big, you know, thing. And, you know, I think that's so cool. And then there's the special, you know, reinterpretation of the DALI mark, which brings us back to the beginning. So, you know, I think this is a great note here. I will go now once more, and I know there's all kinds of stuff and everything, but I do want to just make sure everyone can see it. It's on Foundation. Go here. There, you know, I'm not going to give you financial advice on the podcast, but I will give you art advice, which is at least go look at it. I mean, I think it's super cool and you should look at it. And it also will be for sale. I think the price was mentioned here earlier, 0.8. So, you know, think about what you want to do. But I'm so psyched because always want to talk about our guests' next thing, and very rarely is it on the literal day of the recording of the podcast. So we'll try to get this recorded thing released, and everyone can see this and engage with it, and maybe buy something. So this has been amazing. I think we got some housekeeping to do, which we're not going to tell anyone about. It's housekeeping after we cut, so we're not done. But from an audience standpoint, what do you all think? What does everyone think? Have we missed anything major? Are we making any huge mistakes?
I think we're good.
Yes, I think so too.
I know I didn't pull up Matisse. I didn't see the chat until it was too late. There's a whole Matisse thing. That'll be in part 2. We have to have you back on. On Middlemarch, this has been an amazing episode, by the way. You're lucky if you saw this. If you play Call of Duty and taking a break to learn something about art, you're very lucky. This has been an incredible episode of the Capsule 21 podcast. My incredible co-hosts are Dovetail and Piv, and our triple incredible guest has been Georgina Hooper, an amazing artist who is releasing something now, but check out her full body of work. If you watch this podcast, you know a lot about her. You want to learn more. She's been amazing. Thank you all for watching. And if you've made it this far, the good news is you are next, and we are next week. Coming at you again with another episode of the Capsule 21 podcast every week until we're dead. The pact we have all made, the dark past pact. Thank you all, and see you next week. Capsule 21 out.